All right, settle in, because this one's a doozy. You know, you work your whole life, save up, finally get that quiet little slice of heaven out on the lake, away from the city hustle. My lake cabin, it's not exactly off-grid, but I built it to be pretty darn close. I've got this custom generator, see, my own little power plant out there, essential for when the storms hit, or just when I want to disconnect a bit. But what I didn't plan for, what no deed or permit could ever prepare you for, was a specific kind of HOA president, a woman who shall forever be known in my mind as Karen, who thought my carefully wired generator was her personal property. What she didn't know, when she decided to tamper with it, was that it wasn't just a power source. It was also a very effective, if somewhat lively anti-theft deterrent. She tried to steal my power, literally, and instead got the surprise of a lifetime, courtesy of my engineering skills. It's funny now, but man, it was a whole ordeal back then. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and prepare yourselves, because this is going to be one crazy story. It all started subtle, as these things always do, you know? Like a drip in a leaky faucet, annoying at first, then slowly, relentlessly becoming a torrent. I'm 66, enjoying my retirement at the lake cabin, a place I built myself, board by painstaking board, over a decade of weekends and holidays. It's got this kind of rustic charm, a little bit wild, a little bit independent. My trusty diesel generator, a modified beast I painstakingly designed myself, hummed away happily, providing the extra juice for my workshop, my well pump, or just peace of mind when the grid went down, which it often did during those wild lake storms. It sat nestled behind a sturdy, but not unfriendly, fence, partially obscured by some carefully placed shrubbery, blending into the landscape as much as a machine of its size could. It wasn't unsightly by any stretch, certainly not by the standards of a lakeside community where practicality often trumped pristine landscaping. I took pride in its reliability, the kind of quiet hum that promised independence. And for a long time, it was just a silent sentinel of my self-sufficiency. This was way back, a couple of deeds of careful planning ago, before the modern HOA had really started flexing its muscles on our side of the lake. We were always more of a loose association of cabin owners, respectful of each other's peace, but not really governed by a rule book thick as a phone book. My property, it existed in a kind of twilight zone, technically part of the larger lakeside community, but far enough out that the standard HOA bylaws barely had a grip. Or so I thought. Then Karen arrived. Karen! She must have been destined to have that name etched onto her very soul, a harbinger of passive-aggressive community strife. She wasn't an original owner, you see, but bought one of the newer, boxier, meticulously landscaped mech mansions that had started sprouting up down the shore. She was maybe 54 at the time, but already carried herself with the gravitas of someone who believed she'd personally invented the concept of private property. Her face, perpetually pinched as if she'd just sucked a lemon that didn't quite meet her exacting standards, had a way of scrutinizing everything that wasn't exactly hers. She had those eyes, darting and analytical, constantly cataloging perceived infractions. Dude, I swear, she seemed to breathe in rules and exhale judgment. The word around the lake, carried on the breeze from the dock discussions, was that she'd been an HOA president elsewhere, something she lorded over every casual conversation, as if a prior title was a crown she was perpetually wearing, not an elected position from a defunct permit. My first real run-in with her, beyond the occasional tight-lipped nod, happened on a Monday morning around 9:15 a.m. I was puttering in my garden, humming along to some old blues, when her voice, sharp as a cicada's call, sliced through the morning calm. "Mr. Peterson," she began, standing at the very edge of my property line, hands on her hips like a drill sergeant evaluating a fresh recruit. "Are you aware your lawn is not exactly uniform? The bylaws state a maximum height of 4 inches for common visibility." My lawn? I was cultivating a wildflower patch, a haven for local bees and butterflies, precisely to avoid the monoculture of a golf course fairway. "Karen," I replied, leaning on my shovel, trying to keep a friendly, casual tone, "this isn't a lawn. It's a wildlife habitat. And besides, I'm pretty sure those bylaws don't quite apply this far down. Her lips thinned. Bylaws are universal, Mr. Peterson. The aesthetic integrity of our community is paramount. It felt like a warning, a first little yellow ticket issued in what would become a stack of fabricated fines. This was about 3 permits into her residency, and she was already establishing dominance, testing the waters. This became a recurring theme, escalating like some bizarre reality TV show I never signed up for. Around 7:45 a.m., one Thursday, she actually walked onto my dock, clipboard in hand, and started inspecting my old fishing boat. My boat, a faithful companion that had served me well for countless titles of fishing seasons, was not a pristine yacht, but it was functional and clean. "This vessel," she announced, scribbling something, "appears to have visible hull staining and minor rust on the cleats. This falls under unmaintained personal property, subsection 7C of the aesthetic guidelines." I almost laughed. My boat, that fine old tub, had character, not rust. "Karen," I said, strolling down, coffee mug in hand, "that's called patina and character. And that's subsection 7C? That's for things visible from common areas that detract from property value. My boat's practically hidden from the road by the boathouse." She didn't miss a beat. "Property values are our shared responsibility, Mr. Peterson." It felt less like a concern for property value and more like an attempt to enforce her personal taste as law. It was becoming infuriating, but still manageable, largely ignored. I treated it like background noise, an annoying mosquito I could swat away. She was just Karen, trying to be a big fish in a small pond, oblivious to the fact that her pond was largely contained to her manicured little section of the shore. I never saw these written up as actual fines, just casual observations she felt compelled to impart, like unsolicited advice from an overly opinionated aunt. I documented these encounters, almost subconsciously at first. My security cameras, primarily installed for general property safety after a couple of petty lake life break-ins a few years back, a true testament to the constant low-level risk of remote living, unlike Karen's imagined ones, caught her lurking, her sharp gestures, her general air of self-importance. These clips, time-stamped and filed away, weren't for Karen, they were for me, a private collection of absurdity that someday, I vaguely suspected, would have to be publicly aired. I didn't know then that these mundane observations were deeds being filed, quietly, electronically, waiting to be presented at a court of community opinion. The generator became her new obsession after about 2 deeds worth of minor infractions on other things. She'd initially focused on the visible elements, my slightly overgrown roses, a bird feeder that attracted too many squirrels, anything she could spot from the road or her own pontoon boat. But the generator, a humming behemoth out of sight, yet occasionally heard, clearly got under her skin. She probably heard its reassuring thrumming during a particularly long power outage one Tuesday evening around 8:34 p.m. While her own immaculate home sat in darkness, its modern smart features rendered useless without an auxiliary power source. Perhaps she envied my self-sufficiency, my independence from the utility company's capricious whims. I remember overhearing her once at the small local general store, griping to old Mr. Henderson about unsightly industrial equipment, disrupting the natural ambience of the lake. She kept trying to imply it was too loud, too close to the property line, some new violation every other week. But every complaint, every specific time she brought it up, at 10:57 a.m., Saturday morning while I was just about to make coffee on my porch, at 3:20 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon when I was trying to relax with a book, I had facts. My decibel readings, legally sanctioned placement, the manufacturer's quiet run specs, even copies of the original installation permits from when I first put it in, way back, like 5 titles of property ownership ago for me. All compliant, all above board. My responses were always calm, always factual, always citing regulations she had overlooked or twisted. "Karen," I'd state, "the unit meets all noise abatement standards. It's 10 feet from the property line, well within code, and its enclosure significantly reduces any perceived noise." I made sure to repeat these facts in front of other neighbors, polite nods confirming that she was clearly pushing the issue, trying to create drama where there was none. merely because she sought to exert control over me, an outlier. She'd huff, puff out her cheeks, and march off, leaving me with the satisfying, if fleeting, feeling of a minor victory, like warding off a particularly persistent gnat. I had permits on my side, titles of legal documents proving my rights. It made her attempts feel even more petty, turning her complaints into background noise, a distant echo of someone else's perceived importance, like a faint, ignored fine from a forgotten parking meter. But I was learning that ignoring Karen only worked for so long. Eventually, she would escalate, always. This particular fine print of frustration, it seemed, was only going to get larger. Karen's escalation was predictable as the sunrise, only much less pleasant. After her verbal assaults and flimsy accusations regarding the generator's noise and aesthetics hit a wall of documented compliance, her tactics shifted. Around 2 weeks after her last failed attempt to fine my generator into oblivion, I noticed small, almost imperceptible changes. My motion sensor lights, usually reliable, seemed to flicker more. A tool left casually near the generator's fence one evening would be gone by morning, only to reappear a day later in an odd spot near my back porch, almost as if left to taunt me. This wasn't overt theft. It was petty mischief, the kind designed to subtly annoy, to make me doubt myself, and perhaps to gain insight into the layout of my property. I wasn't stupid. I had my theories, and most of them had a sharp Karen-esque edge. My security cameras, which I'd already installed, became even more critical. I upgraded them, added more angles, and invested in some higher resolution infrared models, strategically camouflaged among the dense foliage that also protected my privacy from nosy neighbors, Karen most notably. It was like I was collecting digital deeds to her escalating intrusiveness, each time-stamped to frame a legal testament. My friend Bill, an old acquaintance from my engineering days, now a sharp-witted retired lawyer, would often swing by for coffee and commiseration. "Dude," he'd say, shaking his head as I recounted Karen's latest antics, "she's trying to get under your skin. Don't give her an inch." Bill, God bless him, had always been a calming influence, but even he saw the pattern. "What you've got here is a paper trail," he'd advised, gesturing to my meticulously organized binder of photos, video stills, and written complaints from Karen. "Every time she opens her mouth or tries to impose a new rule, she's actually building your case. These aren't just tickets. They're evidence." He was right. Each ticket, Karen issued in her own mind. Each subtle attempt at psychological warfare was, to me, another piece of legal ammunition. It wasn't about malice on my part. It was about anticipating her next move and ensuring my self-defense was ironclad. Then came the meeting, an official HOA meeting, which, thanks to Karen's relentless campaigning, now stretched its tendrils to encompass even our semi-autonomous section of the lake. This was maybe 4 permits after she bought her place, and she'd successfully leveraged her past HOA experience into becoming the president, solidifying her grasp on power like some petty dictator. The generator was on the agenda, listed vaguely as potential community energy nuisance. I remember walking into that community hall on a Tuesday evening, a stack of folders under my arm, ready for battle. My neighbor, old Mrs. Albright, a kind woman who'd lived on the lake since before anyone cared about uniform lawn heights, gave my arm a comforting squeeze. "Don't you let her get to you, John," she whispered. "That woman causes more trouble than a bear in a beehive." Karen, sitting at the head table like royalty, began her presentation with a flourish of PowerPoint slides, complete with artist renditions of a supposedly quieter, more aesthetically pleasing communal solar farm she envisioned replacing individual generators. It was utter nonsense, of course, a thinly veiled attempt to force everyone onto her approved power source and, by extension, into her complete control. She claimed my generator was an eyesore, a fire hazard despite its professional installation, and even, gasp, an undue source of carbon emissions, as if my single generator was personally responsible for climate change. Her arguments were theatrical, overblown, a masterclass in emotional manipulation over fact. I calmly presented my counter-arguments. I had expert reports, noise certifications, diagrams, and copies of all my original permits and titles, documents thicker than a telephone book. each one a silent deed proving my right to operate it. I highlighted the fact that my property was grandfathered in for certain structures, that my generator actually reduced the strain on the communal grid during peak hours, and that her proposed solar farm, while noble in theory, was entirely unfeasible for our location and climate without massive subsidies and infrastructural overhaul. The room, which started off mostly swayed by Karen's performance, slowly began to turn as I laid out facts, backed by precise data, demonstrating not just my compliance, but her outright exaggerations. I even had photos of her house during the last blackout, demonstrating her own lack of backup power, a subtle but effective jab at her hypocrisy. The motion to remove my generator was soundly defeated, a collective sigh of relief palpable among the attendees. Karen's face, usually set in a determined frown, morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. It was shocking, almost comical, to see such venom over a generator. "This isn't over, Mr. Peterson," she hissed at me in the parking lot as people dispersed, her voice barely a whisper, yet potent with menace. "You think you've won? You haven't seen what I can do." It was not a threat. It was a guarantee. It wasn't a ticket. It was an invitation to war. This particular fine, I knew, was only just beginning its accrual of interest. I knew then, with grim certainty, that she wouldn't stop until she found a way, any way, to make my life and my generator a problem. This meant I had to be one step ahead, armed with more than just paperwork. Her veiled threats were more than just empty bluster. Karen had a way of making her disapproval felt through various petty acts of harassment that, individually, were dismissible, but cumulatively, felt like a constant psychological assault. This was about 7 permits into her rule, and she was clearly trying to test my patience, trying to wear me down. I'd find her parked across the road, conspicuously observing my cabin for long stretches of time, often around 11:10 a.m. on random weekdays, her dark SUV a silent sentinel of her obsession. Mysterious flyers would appear in my mailbox, not official HOA documents, but thinly veiled warnings about property aesthetics and energy usage, usually around the exact time my generator would kick in for a routine test, as if personally targeted at my habits. My garbage bins, neatly organized for collection, would occasionally be overturned on a Thursday night, spilling contents onto my driveway. Each incident, captured by my ever-watchful cameras, was logged, time-stamped, and backed up. A growing collection of visual tickets on Karen's own misconduct. My frustration wasn't just growing. It was calcifying into a grim determination. I was preparing myself, not for retaliation, but for defense against an increasingly irrational adversary. I didn't want a confrontation, but I was building a fortress of evidence. The smoking gun needed to be built, not just found. Given Karen's escalating attempts at intrusion and her specific obsession with my generator, I knew a direct attempt on my power source was inevitable. My lake cabin, while picturesque, was also somewhat isolated. I'd already taken precautions against actual theft in the past. A couple of break-ins years ago had taught me the value of robust security. That's why, in addition to cameras, I designed a custom electrical deterrent system for the generator. It wasn't some haphazard, dangerous booby trap. It was a professionally engineered, multi-layered security protocol. I'd originally envisioned it for a true intruder, someone trying to disconnect and haul off the unit itself or steal precious fuel. The generator's enclosure, sturdy as a small bunker, had an external panel for power output. I knew enough about electrical engineering to wire that panel, not to deliver lethal voltage, but a very substantial, very unpleasant jolt, enough to make someone regret ever touching it, but safely designed to trip ground fault circuits immediately and cut off. It was a proper, legal, anti-theft measure for private property, clearly marked with hazard warnings. It was like I was laying a title to my property's safety, a deed to its independence. This meticulous plan, this electric permit, took weeks of careful, precise work to design and implement, all documented in a separate encrypted file. I also upgraded the enclosure's locks, adding several industrial-grade mechanisms, reasoning that this would frustrate any casual tampering and hopefully deter all but the most determined. Karen, however, proved to be far more determined than anyone could have imagined. I heard rumors through a sympathetic ally, Sarah, another resident who secretly resented Karen's overbearing nature, that Karen had started openly speculating about how my generator worked. Sarah mentioned a specific phrase from Karen at the HO, a communal pool party, one Saturday around 2:45 p.m. I wonder how Mr. Peterson connects his main line. It would be simple enough to just borrow a little power, wouldn't it? If he's not using it. My blood ran cold. Borrow? This wasn't some extension cord. This was an industrial-grade machine. That subtle mention solidified my premonition. She was going to attempt direct interference with the generator's electrical output. This wasn't a fine anymore. This was a direct assault. My preparation intensified. I added more concealed cameras, not just outside the enclosure, but a discreet one inside, positioned to capture anyone attempting to gain entry or tamper with the wiring. These cameras linked directly to my cloud storage, providing an instantaneous, undeniable record. Around 1:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, about 3 months after the failed HOA meeting, I conducted a final, thorough check of the deterrent system. I confirmed its safety protocols, verified the voltage, painful but non-lethal, and double-checked the warning labels on the panel, deliberately positioned to be easily visible. My plan wasn't to harm Karen. It was to create a situation so undeniably clear-cut, so overtly her own fault, that she couldn't possibly wiggle out of it. It wasn't just about winning. It was about exposing her hubris for all to see. The bait was set. The generator hummed, a low, inviting purr. It was ready to defend itself. This wasn't just about a generator. It was about the fundamental right to peace, property, and the quiet dignity of a man's retirement. It was like a new deed was about to be signed, a new title granted, one of justice. The day came, not with a bang, but with a furtive creep. It was a blustery Friday afternoon, gray clouds hanging heavy over the lake, hinting at an imminent storm. Perfect conditions, I realized with a grim chuckle, for someone to need backup power. Around 4:17 p.m., my internal monitoring system, which provided real-time feedback on the generator's status, showed a slight voltage fluctuation, followed by an immediate activation of my perimeter alarms. These alarms weren't audible. They were silent notifications to my phone, discreetly informing me of any tampering. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I checked the live feed from my strategically placed cameras. There she was, Karen. She was wearing a thick rain jacket, the hood pulled up, and dark gloves. In her hand, I could clearly see a pair of wire cutters and a heavy-duty extension cord with a rather large, presumably power-hungry, appliance plug on the end. My camera logs, recording like a relentless digital deeds office, clocked her at 4:19 p.m., approaching the generator enclosure. She glanced around, a quick, almost practiced furtiveness, oblivious to the multiple lenses silently watching her every move. She tried the new locks I'd installed, fumbled with them for a moment, then, frustrated, produced a crowbar from her bag. Wow, this officer is unbelievable. She just came fully equipped for grand larceny. At 4:23 p.m., she leveraged the crowbar, bending a section of the sturdy fence to create an opening, enough to squeeze through. It was an outright act of vandalism, of trespassing, a blatant attempt to break and enter my secured area. My stomach clenched, not in fear, but in a surge of righteous anger. This woman, with her endless complaints and self-important pronouncements, was now actively destroying my property. She quickly made her way to the external power panel. I saw her hesitate for a moment, her eyes surely scanning the prominently placed high voltage, danger, and security system activated warning labels. But hubris, that insidious monster, seemed to override any sense of caution. Or perhaps she believed it was all a bluff, just another one of my tricks. At 4:26 p.m., she raised the wire cutters. The internal camera, providing a crystal-clear close-up view, showed her reaching for the heavy-duty power output socket, intent on cutting a line or, more likely, directly plugging in her unauthorized extension cord. The second her gloved hand, holding those cutters, made contact with the exposed contact points of the security-wired socket. Boom, or more accurately, ZZAAAP. There wasn't a bang, not an explosion, but an undeniable crackle of electricity. Her whole body tensed, an almost comical rigidness, before she let out a shriek that, even muted by the enclosure walls and recorded through the camera's microphone, was piercing. She reeled back, dropping the wire cutters and extension cord as if they were venomous snakes. The high-pitched scream faded into a desperate cry, then a whimper as she scrambled away, tripping over her own feet, collapsing in a heap just outside the now damaged fence. The internal safety breakers had instantly tripped, as designed, preventing any sustained shock, but the initial jolt had clearly delivered its intended message. My alarm system, still discreetly notifying my phone, now flashed intrusion, primary system breach, deterrent activated. I called 911 immediately, giving a calm, measured report. "Yes, hello. This is John Peterson. I have an intruder on my property. My generator's security system has been activated, and it appears the individual may have received an electrical shock." I didn't identify Karen. I didn't need to. The local sheriff's deputy, Officer Miller, a no-nonsense man who knew my property well from previous, unrelated to Karen calls, arrived within 15 minutes, lights flashing in the now gathering dusk, right as Karen was attempting to regain her composure, looking disheveled and utterly humiliated, clutching her hand, whimpering. My God, he shocked me. That madman tried to electrocute me. She wailed, pointing an accusatory finger at my cabin, which was now brightly lit by the deputy's headlights. Officer Miller took one look at the bent fence, the abandoned wire cutters, the scorch marks around the generator panel, and then at Karen, whose story was already full of holes. She launched into a tearful, dramatic monologue about how I had deliberately set a deadly trap for her, a fellow HOA member who was just inspecting property. Inspecting. I stepped out, calm as a monk, hands visibly empty, and greeted Officer Miller. "Good evening, officer. As I reported, I have evidence of trespassing and property damage." I gestured to the cameras. "Everything is recorded, sir." Man, it was shocking to see how quickly her bluster dissolved when faced with actual law enforcement and the irrefutable truth. Karen, the grand accuser, suddenly looked very, very small. The satisfaction I felt wasn't malicious. It was the deep, resonant peace of an injustice righted. A long overdue title finally issued. The immediate aftermath was chaotic, but ultimately incredibly satisfying. Officer Miller, after taking down both our statements, watched the footage from my external and internal cameras right there on my laptop, the screen illuminating his stern face in the growing darkness. The video showed everything. Karen arriving fully equipped with wire cutters and a crowbar around 4:19 p.m., forcing her way through my fence at 4:23 p.m., ignoring the prominent high-voltage danger and security system activated warnings at 4:25 p.m., and finally, her ill-fated attempt to tamper with the wiring at 4:26 p.m., culminating in the flash and her theatrical shriek. Officer Miller didn't need a lawyer to tell him what he was seeing. "Mrs. Finch," he said, using Karen's actual surname, his voice gravely serious, "it appears you were attempting to gain unauthorized access to Mr. Peterson's generator and tamper with his property. Those signs were clearly visible, and Mr. Peterson has every right to protect his property from trespass and theft, including with non-lethal deterrents." Karen, looking utterly defeated and still rubbing her stinging hand, tried to pivot. But the shock. He deliberately electrified his property to hurt me. This is criminal. Actually, I interjected calmly, handing Officer Miller a laminated copy of my generator's wiring diagram and the specific permits for the security system. I installed 3 deeds of property protection ago. The system is designed to deliver a safe, non-lethal jolt within legal limits for property security. It's a ground fault protected system, meaning it immediately cuts off to prevent sustained contact. It's a deterrent for thieves, not a death trap, and the warning labels are very clear. She chose to ignore them. Officer Miller scanned the documents. It appears Mr. Peterson's system is within compliance for a private property security measure. The only person who would get shocked is someone actively trying to tamper with it. He looked at Karen. "So, Mrs. Finch, why exactly were you trying to inspect someone's generator with wire cutters and a crowbar?" She stammered, tried to backtrack, offering pathetic excuses about checking for code violations and ensuring community safety. It was pitiful. Karen. Officer Miller stated flatly, his patience clearly exhausted. You were caught on camera attempting to steal power or at minimum, illegally disable Mr. Peterson's private property. That constitutes trespassing, vandalism, and attempted theft. He read her rights. She was arrested right there, a surreal tableau of flashing lights, my hum generator, and Karen, the once unflappable HOA president, being escorted to a patrol car, her head hanging in shame. My satisfaction wasn't cruel. It was vindication, pure and unadulterated, the final title in a long, arduous process. The legal proceedings were brief and decisively in my favor. With the clear video evidence, my meticulously documented permits and technical specifications for the deterrent system, and Officer Miller's testimony, Karen's defense crumbled faster than a dry cracker. She pleaded down to trespassing and vandalism, trying desperately to avoid the attempted theft charge, but the intent was clear in the footage. She received a hefty fine, a truly monumental fine this time, not her made-up ones, a probationary period, and a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property. More importantly, she was immediately stripped of her HOA presidency, and her tenure was marked by a flurry of other complaints from neighbors emboldened by my victory. Old Mrs. Albright even filed a report about Karen repeatedly parking on her lawn and threatening her about the color of her mailbox. Suddenly, all those little tickets Karen thought she was issuing were being paid back with interest. The general sentiment in the community swung dramatically. My other neighbors, many of whom had secretly suffered under Karen's petty tyranny for years, came out of the woodwork to offer their support and appreciation. They saw me as the underdog vindicated, the one who finally stood up to the bully and won. The HOA, now with a new, much more reasonable president, held a meeting where they officially apologized for Karen's conduct and revised their bylaws to prevent future abuses of power. It felt like a new era, a peaceful season replacing the stormy one. My generator hummed on, a beacon of my independence, now widely regarded as a symbol of defiance against arbitrary authority. Life at the lake cabin returned to its tranquil rhythm. I still hear the generator's hum, but now it brings a different kind of peace, a quiet triumph. My mornings are again filled with the gentle lapping of waves and the chirping of birds, not the intrusive demands of a busybody. I continued my work in the garden, still enjoying my wildflowers and fishing from my old boat. My life was finally devoid of the daily drumbeat of suspicion and anger that Karen had inflicted. It was a victory, hard won, but absolutely worth every second of frustration and effort. The irony, of course, is that Karen, with all her self-proclaimed power and authority, ended up tripping her own circuit. She wanted to control my energy, but she simply powered her own downfall. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the craziest lengths you've seen someone go to, just to exert control over something that was never theirs to begin with? Drop a comment below and let me know.